everyone and welcome back. I'm Diane Deziel, and today in the video I show you how to make the pattern of a pleated skirt, a pleat right on the center front. Today the style 105, we're going to do the first pleated skirt. It's only one single pleat at the center front. The back of the skirt could be the one we did at the very beginning for the style 100, the basic skirt. So we will concentrate on doing just the front, but in this style I'm going to show you two different ways to do the inverted or box pleat. First of all, there's little confusion. Is it an inverted pleat or a box pleat? And I'm not going to pretend I know better than anyone. I just know that you could call it inverted. In that case, I would call it inverted because the pleats are going face to face, so in opposite direction. And to me, the box pleat is when you do it upside down. So on the top, you don't have a single line in the middle, but you have two lines for the depth of the pleat. So if you look at my little sample that I have in half scale, you could see what is an inverted pleat. It is in fact two knife pleats that are in opposite direction. And as you must know, a pleat is always 3 layers of fabric. For the first one, the pattern, the complete front is going to be one single pattern piece. And for the second style, you'll see that the front will be in 3 pattern pieces, left side, right side, and the back of the pleat as a different piece. For the way it looks, they're both the same. You could hardly say which one is which, unless you use a different fabric or a different color for the back of the pleat. Also, when you have 3 pattern pieces instead of 1, it's easier to place on your marker, so it might save you some fabric. For this style, I'm going to easily be able to do the pattern right away. So make sure you have enough paper for your hem and enough for the seam allowance on the side seam and at the waist. Then you could trace all around. Now before to work on my pleat, I'm going to trace my dart and put my punch hole 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch higher on the middle line of the dart. And just like for the other one, I circle my punch hole. If you remember, the punch hole is the reference that you report on your fabric. Now what we have to do is add the pleat at the center front, of course. I'm showing you again my sample just to see what we're talking about. The depth of the pleat is from the center front to the end or the fold. To create the pleat, we'll need to add twice that value. And on the pattern or the plan, you should trace both depth of the pleat separately, so we have construction line for each one. For my example, I'm going to make the depth of the pleat 5 centimeters because it's the width of my ruler. So I'm going to trace 2 lines at the width of my ruler. If you're using inches, it's 2 inches wide. The next thing we have to do is decide from which level we want the pleat to open. If you want the pleat to start opening at the waist, you're going to skip that next step and go right away to the folding of the pleat to get the little jog at the waist. But usually you don't want the pleat to start opening right away. We want to control the pleat for a little while, at least where we have the little belly. So very often those pleats will start pretty much at the hip level. And that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to take my ruler, place it 90 degrees from the center front and touch the hip notch that I have at the side seam. I'm going to trace a dotted line because it's just a guide all the way until the last line. Now to indicate the end of the seam, because it's going to be sewn from the waist all the way to the hip level, I need to put a reference or an indication on my pattern and of course on the fabric. It's going to be a punch hole. If I want it to be sewn until the hip level, the punch hole is going to be 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch higher and 3 millimeter or 1/8 inside the pleat. Now we're going to put all information. So starting with the grain line, the name of the piece, it's my front. I'm going to cut it only one time because it's going to be cut on the fold of the fabric. It's cut, of course, in the main fabric, and the size of my pattern is still a size 10. Now we could put the seam allowance. The hem at the bottom could be 1.5 inches, 2 inches, no problem. And we'll put the normal seam allowance on the side seam and at the waist. I almost forget to put my information for the fold of the fabric. It's going to be on the second line that we added for the depth of the pleat. I'm going to trace my 3 circles. Now the notches, as you could see, I reported my notch on the contour line. I put my ruler and I just elongate the line, same direction. It's more accurate. The hip notch, and you have 1 notch for the hem at the side seam. Then you have at the waist and at the bottom, you have a notch to indicate your center front. And finally, you have 2 more notches, so waist and bottom at the last line, so twice the depth of the pleat. Now we're going to fold the pattern or plan directly on the center front line. Once it's folded, you open it. Then you bring the center front right over the last line that you traced, so the fold of the fabric. Now that my plan pattern is folded, I'm going to retrace with the tracing wheel the seam line and the seam value. Then we just cut all around. Now we're going to do the notches. My pattern is finished for the first inverted pleat. So I did add an A to my 105. Before to continue, I want to share with you an habit that I have. I usually put on my pattern piece for pleat, I place an arrow to indicate the direction I want it to be folded. For the second technique, it's the same thing. I'm going to do a pattern right away, and I'm going to start by tracing it on the paper. Keep enough paper for your seam allowance, waist and side seam, and a hem at the bottom. Same thing also for the dart. I'm going to trace it and put my punch hole 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch higher. Now, just like for the other style or other technique, I'm now going to add the depth of my pleat. But with this technique, what's interesting is that you could put a different measurement on top and at the bottom. Usually, because even if it's at the waist or at the hip, the beginning of the opening, even if you put a very deep pleat, it cannot open that much. But at the bottom, it could easily open completely. So usually we place a smaller measurement on top and a wider measurement at the bottom. Now for the first style, I used my ruler. It was 5 centimeter. But for this one, I need 2 measurements. So I'll make a little smaller on top. I'll do it 4 cm. And at the bottom, a little wider. I'll make it 6 centimeter. I put little reference, and now I'm going to connect both. Now for you to see where this pleat is going to go on the skirt, on the basic tracing, I'm going to ask you to redo the same thing. So 4 centimeter, but this time from the center front towards the inside of the skirt, and same thing at the bottom, the same measurement. And this time I'm going to trace just a dotted line. For this style, I'm also going to start opening the pleat at the hip level, but you could change the level, no problem. I'm going to trace a dotted line also as a reference. Now, if you remember, we did place a reference to stop the sewing 1 centimeter higher than the hip level and 3 millimeter inside the pleat. And now we're going to do exactly the same thing. Now, just like for the other technique, I'm going to ask you to fold your paper on the center front line. Then with the tracing wheel, I'm going to trace this little part of the waist and this little part of the hem. On the first style, we did place twice the depth of the pleat, but on this one, I just put it one time because we're going to do a separate piece for the back of the pleat. Now we're going to place the information grain line. This is my front. That piece is going to be cut one pair. I need a left side and a right side, and it's going to be in the main fabric. We could add the seam allowance and the hem, seam allowance on side seam, waist, and also on the depth of the pleat here, and we put the hem at the bottom. Now we're going to cut all around the piece. Now we have to do the last piece, that is the back of the pleat. We now have 2 layers of fabric. We're missing the 3rd layer that's going to bring us back to the center front. So this piece here we're missing. So I'm going to put another piece of paper under, and I'm going to retrace from this pattern this part from the center front to the dotted line. That was the same mirror piece that we have on the other side. To stabilize my paper together, I'm going to place a pin or two. Then I report also my grain line. Before to remove my paper, I could trace at the bottom the hem. Because I only traced the inside line, I'm now going to trace the outside line at the hem and at the waist. Now for this new piece, I'm missing only one seam allowance. It's the dotted line that we traced, this one here, because it was inside the pattern. The other side I did a complete line because it was my center front. Now I'm going to ask you to cut all around this new piece. Now the notch for these 2 pieces, you're going to have first the notch for the hem, both sides of the large piece. You're going to have the hip notch. You're going to have the notches for the dart. Then you're going to have the center front notch at the top and at the bottom. For the small piece, you're going to have notch at the center front also, but this time it's half notch on top and at the bottom. And of course, you're also going to indicate the hem. To these notch, we're going to add another notch to assemble the small piece with the large piece. But before placing that last notch, I'm going to show you how it goes together and form the pleat. Now, if we look at the first style, the 105A, you remember that we bring the center front over the center front. That creates the pleat and give us the 3 layers. If we do the same thing here, we fold and bring this fold over the center front. We'll look inside. We have again the 3 layers that create the pleat, but this time here it's not a fold, it's a seam where we're going to put the symbol for the fold of the fabric. This piece is the back of the pleat. It's going to be cut 1 time on the fold of the fabric in the main fabric. Now that the information are there, it's going to be easier to place your piece face to face. See my seam allowance together, face to face like that. Align the bottom and the top, and we're going to place notch on both pieces in the same time, anywhere on the line, but not centered. Now I'm just going to do my notch all around each of my piece. That's it, the 2 patterns are done. So we finished the style 105 and we learned 2 ways to do the pleat. That's it for today. I hope you enjoy. Thanks for watching and I see you next time.